What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to be reviewing the entirety of The Flash Season 7 and just giving you guys my thoughts and opinions on the season. But of course, before we get started, make sure that you guys like, share, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment any other video suggestions for me. So guys, I'm just gonna, sort of review it, I guess, episode by episode or, storyline by storyline, just so you guys are aware of that. So guys, of course, at the start of The Flash Season 7, we were continuing with the Mirror Monarch storyline, as obviously it was cut short in Season 6 due to COVID. The cliffhanger from Season 6 was that Iris disappeared in the Mirrorverse. We don't know what happened to her. So yeah, in Season 7, I think Season 7, it started on the right track. Episode 1, I thought was a very, very interesting and fun episode. Barry, all the different wells channeling into Barry was a very fun idea. And then, of course, Barry getting his speed back at the end, and him talking to all the different Welleses, that was just a chill. It was chilling. It was an amazing scene. That was an amazing episode in my opinion. So yeah, I definitely thought that one was great, but the Mirror Monarch storyline for the first 3 episodes of Season 7 still wasn't very good. But Episode 1 was so good because it wasn't mainly focused on that Mirror Monarch storyline. We had stuff to distract us from that. Just like in Season 6, I really did not think the Mirror Monarch storyline was amazing or anything, or like, the black hole stuff, but we still had stuff to, distract us from that, like the Godspeed episode or the Reverse Flash storyline happening during that time, and, the Grodd episode. All that was, sort of distracting us from the Mirror Monarch storyline, which I really have never thought was amazing. So yeah, Episode 1, Barry gets the artificial Speed Force up and running and gets his speed back, and of course that goes into Episode 2, where Barry gets his speed thinking ability. Now, in this episode, he turns from, he doesn't have any emotion whatsoever. He just wants the best for, he wants to eliminate the threat. That was basically his goal, just eliminate Eva, get rid of her, and he did not care who he hurt doing that. And then eventually you get that, the Flash versus Team Flash battle, which was amazing. Frost getting speed was a very, very fun thing. That was a very, very interesting episode. And then of course the ending with Timeless Wells making his first appearance. I thought that was a pretty interesting start to that. But of course it didn't end up being as amazing as the season went on. But again, the Mirror Monarch storyline, especially in this episode, she did not feel like a threat whatsoever. I really just did not like how they, executed her storyline throughout the first 3 episodes of the season. They were just, just trying to get rid of her storyline, just trying to get it over with type of thing. So yeah, thankfully the first 2 episodes were not mainly just, focused on Eva and her Mirror Monarch storyline. They had a lot of other great stuff going around. That's why I thought those first 2 episodes were pretty good to start off the season. So then that brings us to Episode 3, and this is definitely the worst episode out of the first 3 episodes, or the rest of the Mirror Monarch storyline, I should say. Just because this one was only focused basically on, stopping Eva and, this thing going on in Central City where all the citizens are, getting thrown into the Mirrorverse and all that stuff happening. I didn't think that was, like, amazing. It kind of felt like kind of repetitive because that's similar to the Bloodworks storyline. And if this was still in Season 6, that would feel extremely repetitive because they had, like, somewhat of the same finale to each of those graphic novels, and that really would not have sat well with me. So yeah, Episode 3 definitely took a step back. They just got rid of Eva. They didn't kill her or anything. She just went back to the Mirrorverse. I just didn't really find very much entertainment in that episode whatsoever. And then of course you had the cliffhanger of the forces being reborn whenever Barry was given his speed back from Iris, who was in the Mirrorverse and somehow had a connection to the Speed Force, which of course then rebirthed the Speed Force and created all these other new forces that of course would lead into the next storyline, God Complex. So the graphic novel God Complex has to deal with, of course, all the forces. They took that straight out of the comic books. They used the forces. And this storyline lasted from Episode 4 until Episode 11. And this storyline, I have to say, is awful. This storyline is terrible. So first of all, actually, Episode 4 with Abracadabra, it was pretty decent. I love that Abracadabra returned. He's a great villain on The Flash, and his storyline was actually very, very good. He felt like an actual menacing villain, probably the first actual, like, threatening villain we've had so far in Season 7 out of the first 4 episodes. So yeah, it was awesome in that episode to see Abracadabra return, and then you also had Barry with the line where he's talking about Oliver. He's talking about Oliver dying in Crisis on Infinite Earths to Abracadabra. I thought that was a great scene. Then of course you had the ending with the Strength Force monster appearing and killing Abracadabra. I thought that was actually pretty interesting at the time, although it ended up not being as interesting. You also had Caitlin and Frost, splitting up. I really thought they were like sort of setting Frost to leave the show. I really actually kind of hoped that would happen. I sort of wanted Caitlin to go back to her like season 1 form where she's just the doctor. She doesn't do anything else besides that. I really liked that version of Caitlin. So yeah, episode 4 really wasn't too bad. I mean, of course, you had some cringy writing here and there. And, there's been cringy writing this whole season. The first 4 episodes and the rest of the season as a whole, there has been a lot of cringy writing, and I really am not a fan of that whatsoever. I'm pretty sure nobody likes that at all. So they definitely got to change that next season. So yeah, episode 4, it's not too bad. It's not the best thing in the world, but I think it's still watchable. But then we go on to episode 5, which in my opinion is the best episode of the God Complex graphic novel. You had Psyche's first appearance, and now Psyche, the first episode we saw him, I thought he was such a threatening villain, making Barry see the Reverse Flash and Savitar. That was an amazing scene. I really thought this Force's storyline was headed sort of in the right direction at this point, but of course that did not end up being the case later in the season. You also had Speed Force Nora just appearing in Star Labs out of nowhere in this episode. At the time, I thought that was a pretty interesting twist. Didn't really expect that happening. But yeah, then she says that she was basically beat up by a bunch of the other forces, or the Strength Force monster, I should say, and Psyche. So I guess that part was decently interesting. However, there's still tons of cringy writing in this episode. This season's writing and just storylines are probably the worst I've ever seen on The Flash. But yeah, to sum up episodes 4 and 5, they're starting off the God Complex graphic novel, and in my opinion, they're still decently watchable, I guess. So now let's move on to episode 6. So at this point, we have been introduced to the Strength Force and the Sage Force, that being Psyche and the Strength Force monster. So in episode 6, we were introduced to the Still Force, that being Dion, who has the power to basically control time, I guess you could say. And this episode is pretty bad. It's not amazing. I mean, it's okay. I mean, you have some interesting stuff. Chester and Cisco getting stuck in the 90s. I guess that part of it was kind of fun, and I understand what they were trying to do with that. I just don't think it was executed properly. It was really focused on Chester, which isn't bad. Chester's a great character. I just think that his storyline that he was given in this episode wasn't insanely interesting. And this is one of the episodes where it started to get really bad because Barry's really not even in this episode. He's basically a side character. And this is one of the things that just makes me angry about this season is in like 4 or 5 episodes, Barry's not the main character. It is unbelievable how stupid they make in this. So I really was not a fan of that whatsoever. And then basically Dion, changing like culture, I guess you could say. Basically just, I don't know, changing it, making it so that Team Flash all of a sudden is like their hairstyles and their clothing styles and everything else is like 90s. That is... It's really random, and I personally really wasn't a fan of that. They're trying to be like, I feel like Eric Wallace is like, yeah, let's try to be really fun this season, and it just did not work at all. So yeah, I think episode 6 was just where this Force's storyline started to get really stupid and just like hysterical, if you want to put it that way. So now moving on to episode 7, and I have a lot of problems with this episode. Firstly, the Speed Force following Barry everywhere. She is incredibly annoying. First of all, I forgot to mention back in, when this Force's storyline stuff started, we got to see Barry do some more, CSI work. I thought that part was great. And he's just trying to do some more CSI work this episode, and I just really was not a fan of how the Speed Force just follows him all around the place. And of course, the Kristen Kramer and Joe storyline starting up, that added absolutely nothing to the season. Really wasn't very good at all in my opinion. And then of course in this episode as well, you had the Killer Frost and Chillblaine storyline going on. That was was terrible. It was awful, in my opinion. Chillblaine, I thought he was going to be a decent villain, and he really didn't become a villain at all. I really thought he was going to be like that Captain Cold type of villain. Thought Barry might, face him every once in a while, sort of giving us a little bit of nostalgia, sort of like back in season 1 when Barry would face Captain Cold. That stuff was awesome. But of course, they didn't do that at all. They're just making all the villains Barry's friends now, and that just makes me so mad. I really hate how they do that. And another thing I really did not like about this Forces storyline, it seems like we barely saw Barry use his powers at all. And it's just unbelievable. This is The Flash. This is the show The Flash, and he doesn't use his powers. It really doesn't make any sense whatsoever. They're just trying to focus everything on the Forces, and that really did not work at all for this season. And of course, with this Frost storyline, her getting arrested, of course, that's what happens next in episode 8. That also just really wasn't good. I really did not enjoy that at all either. So yeah, speaking of episode 8, let's move on. So in episode 8, we see Frost's trial, and I'm going to be honest, I did not care at all about Frost's trial. In my opinion, ever since Frost stopped being a villain, she has not been a good character. I really liked her as a villain. She was a great villain, a secondary main villain in season 3, and I really wish, they kept her as a villain. Maybe if they did end up splitting Caitlin and Frost could, re-become a villain. I think that would be great to see, because she was, a really emotional villain as well, although she was still Caitlin, so that's why she was an emotional villain back in season 3. So yeah, at this point, I was really just hoping that, Frost might leave the show and we would just be left with Caitlin. I was really hoping that would happen, because Frost, I just think she's just been a very, very annoying character this season, and I really wasn't a fan of that. So then Barry and the Speed Force, they basically find Alexa, who they find out is the Strength Force monster. So they basically try and help her, and then the Speed Force at the end goes insane and basically kills, or presumably kills, Alexa, basically saying how, she's in danger of the Strength Force and all these other forces, and the Speed Force is now evil, and she wants to get rid of all the forces. Now, I will say this, I'm not totally against the Speed Force being a villain on The Flash, but I think it would have been a lot better. I think it would have worked a lot better if they did something like, the Speed Force is contaminated and it's like affecting Barry and making Barry evil. I think that would be awesome to see. So then Barry would sort of be the main villain, I guess. I don't know exactly, that would probably be more like a 2 or 3 episode type of storyline, but it still would have been pretty cool to see. But I'm not a huge fan of them making the Speed Force a person and making them the villain. But even though they did do that, they made the Speed Force a person, I think they made the right decision of making the Speed Force Nora Allen, or in the form of Nora Allen, I should say, because that does, I guess, give you like an emotional attachment to the villain, or emotional connection, or whatever you want to call it. So I definitely think that did work in the season, because you do hear Barry mention his mother a few times during the season. I thought that was pretty good. But now moving on to episode 9, this is where the Speed Force basically starts being a villain, just out of nowhere, snap of a finger, she's a villain. And I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of how they went about that. As I said before, I'm not against the Speed Force being a villain on The Flash. But this episode also sees Timeless Wells return. We see Barry and Timeless Wells time travel back to the night that the Forces were created to, sort of stop them from being created, I guess you could say. But that they just time traveled for no reason, because they ended up letting them be created, but I think it was all right. I mean, it's time travel on the show. You like seeing time travel. I think it's pretty good. They also utilized Barry a lot more in this episode, which I was a very big fan of, because obviously, it's a TV show. You got to have the main character in the show, and I think they finally did that in this storyline in this episode. And of course, you had the Still Force talking to Barry in this episode that he froze time. That looked cool, but not necessarily. There was not really a need for that, I guess you could say. Now, even with all these cringy lines being said, there's still some just great acting from Grant Gustin and Tom Cavanaugh, and that's basically the main highlight of this Forces storyline is great acting from 2 of the best actors on the show. But anyways, then at the end of episode 9, you had Speed Force Nora basically threatening to kill Dion unless he teams up with her, and that, I guess it's whatever, it's a villain being a villain, that's just kind of getting old at this point. But yeah, still episode 9, them throwing time travel into the mix is definitely pretty cool to see, and that's about the only good thing that happened in the episode. So then we move on to episode 10, and oh boy, this one was rough. This was a very bad episode for one particular reason. I mean, the rest of it wasn't very good at all, but there was just one thing that really stood out that was so bad. So first of all, we see Psyche return as the quote-unquote villain for the episode, and he's basically trying to kill people that screwed him over in the past, I guess. So then Barry gets Alexa to channel her inner strength force monster, so then he and Alexa can go up and fight Psyche and try to stop him. So they end up, I guess there's a strength force versus Psyche fight, just really not that cool. And they end up getting Psyche to team up with them. And then probably the worst moment in Flash history happens right after that. They decide for Psyche and Alexa to call Barry and Iris their parents. Yes, what do you do? Just because you were forces that were created by when Iris is trying to get Barry his speed back, that you're gonna call them your parents? Like, am I watching a kid's show? What is this? That was probably the most cringe thing I've ever heard from the show. I just about had a seizure from how cringy that was. And oh no, Dion, Psyche, and Alexa did not refer to Barry and Iris as their parents just once. They did it for the rest of the storyline. It was so, every time they said it, it was terrible. I don't understand why they did that. That was probably that's got to be the worst line I have ever heard from this show. But then at the end of the episode, you had Nora and Dion appearing out of nowhere, and Nora kills Iris, well, presumably kills Iris, Alexa, and Psyche. But then you find out at the start of episode 11 that Dion actually made them think that they were dead, but they weren't actually dead. Or no, sorry, Psyche made them think they were actually dead, but they weren't actually dead. Which brings us to the finale of this terrible storyline. So in the finale, you had Speed Force Nora looking like a literal demon, which was very weird. So basically it was Psyche, Dion, Barry and Iris, and Alexa all going up against Speed Force Nora. And of course, at this time, you still have the cringy writing of, Barry and Iris calling Dion, Psyche, and Alexa, Dion, Psyche, and Alexa their kids, it's just terrible. I hate this. This is probably, as I said before, I just can't say enough how stupid that is. So anyways, they all fight Nora, and basically, there's like this huge tornado that appears out of nowhere in the middle of Central City. Barry has to go stop that, which leaves the three forces going up against Speed Force Nora. Here's one thing I will give them. I like how they didn't say Barry defeated Speed Force Nora, because how can Barry defeat his own power? I like how they did, Dion defeating her instead of, Barry actually defeating her. If Barry defeated her, it really wouldn't make any sense. Why, like, if he defeated her, it would just be like, well, why isn't Barry the Speed Force? Actually, technically, Barry is the Speed Force in the comics. He creates the Speed Force when he gets struck by lightning. So I think if they did that on the show, that'd be pretty interesting. Anyways, so basically Dion that basically makes Nora see a possible future where she's like the only force remaining in the world, or in the universe, I guess you could say, and she just acts like a little baby crying, saying, oh no, why am I the only force left? Like, come on, this is a force of nature, and you're gonna have her act like a little small child? I don't really see the relevance in that whatsoever. That just really, I was not a fan of that. But then the end scene of the finale was actually pretty good. You had Barry and Iris saying to start a family, and we also get that Impulse reference, which I guess was pretty cool. So yeah, in conclusion, this storyline was absolutely terrible, and I would give it a solid 3.5 out of 10, maybe a 4 if I'm feeling generous. But now let's move on to the next graphic novel. Sorry, not graphic novel. This isn't a graphic novel. It's basically just like, 3 filler episodes. Let's move on to that. It's called Interlude Part 1. That's what they're calling it, which means they're going to have an Interlude Part 2, I guess you could say. And this is basically them focusing on certain characters for a few episodes, just making those characters, the focus of the episode. So of course, this one started with Cisco's final episode, which, I kind of like this. This episode wasn't too bad. Besides one thing, the villain choice. Like, come on, man, this is the villain that OG Team Flash is going to face for the final time? No thank you. Like, they should have definitely brought back a villain from Season 1. That would have been so much better. This Rainbow Raider 2.0 villain, just not a good villain. It's just not a likable villain whatsoever. Honestly, I hated this villain. And Barry and Cisco breakdancing, I guess that was, it was kind of fun, I guess you could say, but just like not really relevant. I kind of wanted this to be like a more emotional episode, as obviously it's Cisco's final episode, but besides, the terrible villain and the occasional, like, this is supposed to be a really fun episode type thing, this episode was pretty good. I'd give it like a 6.5 out of 10. So because there were some very good storylines, like Cisco, remembering all his memories that he's had at Star Labs and all that stuff, on Team Flash. I thought that was a very good scene. And then Cisco and Barry and Joe all at the loft after that, I thought that was decent. All right, I guess. But yeah, so far the interlude part 1 was not off to the best start, but it was okay. So now let's move on to episode 13, which is the Cecile-focused episode, and this episode it's terrible. This episode is not good. Besides some great acting from Grant Gustin, I really did not enjoy this episode. You had basically like Cecile's like this like other version of her or something like that. It was sort of basically Psycho Pirate's mask, I guess, sort of taking control of her and making her a villain and basically locking her up in her own mind. I guess that was sort of interesting. I mean, I like how they brought back the name Psycho Pirate. He should have been in Crisis on Infinite Earths because he is one of the most important roles in Crisis on Infinite Earths in the comics, so I don't know why they didn't do that. But I guess it was kind of cool to see him back again, even though it really wasn't him, it was just his mask. So yeah, besides, as I said, some good acting from Grant Gustin, I really didn't like this episode at all. But now let's move on to episode 14, also known as the worst episode of all time. I'd say might be the worst episode in the Arrowverse. This episode was so bad. The Flash is not even in it. This show is The Flash. This show is not called Allegra. This show is not called Cecile the telepath. This is The Flash. We don't want to see all these other storylines going around. We want to see The Flash and what he has to deal with. We want to see him face some comic book villains. And of course, they don't do anything like that in this episode. He's on vacation, everybody. The Flash is gone. Like, they really did not need to make this an episode. I don't think a single person cares about this episode. I don't think anyone really cares about Allegra. Nobody really cares about Cecile that much. So this episode it really did not do anything good for the season. I also just can't say enough how cringe this writing is that they had for the season. You had like Speed Force Nora being evil, saying like "stupid boy" and all that stuff. That's just it's so cringe and just not good dialogue. You have like Chester and Allegra being like super awkward around each other, and just like when Barry comes back at the end of episode 14, just like, what happened? They look at each other and go, nothing. That was probably one of the most cringe things I've ever seen on The Flash this season so far. But up to episode 14, it was a terrible season. If this season ended after episode 14, I think I would actually give it a 1 out of 10. It was so bad up to this point. So yeah, with all of that BS out of the way, finally we start the Godspeed storyline. Now this storyline was a huge refresher compared to everything else that we saw this season. We started off with the Godspeed just entering Central City, this Godspeed war starting up. We see a pretty cool fight scene between Barry, fighting all these Godspeeds. Of course, we still have Frost and, Chillblaine. He did not need to be in this episode. There was no reason for him to be in this episode. And still, while this is going on, we still have this Allegra storyline going on in the background. I skipped those scenes. They're just, I don't care about Allegra. I don't care about her storyline. I don't care about, her cousin. I don't really care about what's going on with her. I just want to see Barry go up against Godspeed and, that storyline playing out. I thought that part, it was very, very good in this episode. And yeah, the episode 15, I would say, was probably a 7.5, 8 out of 10. Definitely a huge step up from what we saw earlier in the season. Then you had episode 16, and this episode took a step in the right direction. You had Diggle returning for this episode. You had some Green Lantern stuff, some little teasers here and there. And then, of course, at the end, he says, I got to deal something that has been hanging over my head for a while. And, of course, we're assuming this is the Green Lantern ring that he presumably found at the end of Arrow. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see how that plays out. Quick prediction, I think that'll, start to play out in the first 5 episodes sometime in the Flash Season 8 when that, sort of team-up things going on. Anyways, episode 16 at the end, of course, after Barry, faces some Godspeeds, he gets some more information about what's going on. Of course, then you have Nora and Bart, making their first appearance. Well, Nora, not her first appearance, but her first appearance as this different timeline version of Nora, and then Bart appearing for the first time, which was a great scene. I really like how they, used him throughout the season, even if it was only like 3 episodes. So yeah, in episode 16, of course, you had, them finding August Hart, who lost his memory when he time traveled back in time. We find that out in episode 17, which is the 150th episode. In this episode, you have tons of speedsters. Well, not as many as the finale, but you still have a lot of speedsters. You have Jay Garrick, you have XS, you have Impulse, and you have the Flash, of course. So yeah, that was all great to see. And them facing all these Godspeed clones. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the Godspeed clone stuff. We find out that they're all after August Hart. Now, I do like the concept of a Godspeed Civil War. I think they could have made that pretty interesting. However, at the same time, why isn't just Godspeed the main villain? I don't want Godspeed, like, clones to be the main villain. I want Godspeed to be the main villain. And it really sort of felt like the clones were more of the main villain than Godspeed himself, although this was still a pretty interesting storyline. So then at the end of the 150th episode, Barry goes into August Hart's mind, and we see him talk to the real Godspeed, of course, August Hart, and that goes into the finale of the season, episode 18, and this is where August Hart explains his plan that he wants real speed. He doesn't want basically artificial speed, is what he's saying, and basically Barry is tempted to give him what he wants, so then Godspeed doesn't, destroy Central City. So eventually, Barry does give August Hart what he wants, and because of that, he regains his memories, and then of course you have the final battle between Barry and Godspeed. Now, of course, before that happened, you had Barry and all the other speedsters he had taking out a bunch of the Godspeed clones. You had all the speedsters were the Flash, Barry Allen. You had Iris West come back as a speedster. She got a boost from the Speed Force, who obviously is another speedster. Speed Force Nora came back. And then, of course, you still had XS, Jay Garrick, and Bart Allen, aka Impulse. They were all great to see. A huge speedster fight was amazing. I love the amount of speedsters in this episode. That was the big highlight of this this final storyline of this season. But anyways, in this final battle, Barry gets absolutely demolished by Godspeed. Godspeed was way faster than Barry in this final battle, but then right as Godspeed is about to kill Barry, you all know Reverse Flash comes in out of nowhere, and Barry and Reverse Flash team up. So yeah, now it's Reverse Flash and Barry versus Godspeed. Now something interesting happens after this. That Godspeed gets a lightsaber, they all get lightsabers, and now it is Star Wars, guys. Star Wars is happening on the show. It's a Speed Force lightsaber battle, and I'm not completely against that. It was kind of interesting, but I kind of wanted just a classic speedster battle. I think that would have been amazing to see. A Reverse Flash, the Flash, and Godspeed all in one speedster battle would have been just awesome. But anyways, Reverse Flash stabs Godspeed through the heart with his lightsaber, but I still think it would have been really cool if they all got in a speedster battle and then the Reverse Flash killed Godspeed with his vibrating hand, or not killed, but injured Godspeed with his vibrating hand. That would have been a lot better to see. But then after Reverse Flash stabs Godspeed, Barry and Thawne get into an argument, and Thawne charges at Barry, but then we see how fast Barry really is, and that was so cool to see, because in the comics, Barry is so powerful. He's so much powerful than he has been on the show, and Eric Walt said in Season 8 he's going to try and make Barry seem like a much more powerful hero, which I'm really excited for, as Barry obviously throws Thawne across the pavement. But yeah, then Barry says, "I got faster, didn't you?" Thawne says, "No, but I will, Flash. Mark my words." So it should be a great scene to see Reverse Flash finally return, probably in like Season 8. Now, before we wrap up the video, I want to talk a little bit more about the Godspeed stuff. So, what I think should have happened is these filler episodes with Cecile and Allegra, those should just be kicked out of the show. All those episodes successfully did was pissed me off. So those should definitely not be in the show. And what those should have been, those should have started the Godspeed storyline, those 2 episodes right there. But with that being said, though, I'm still fine with episode 12 sticking where it is, as, it's Cisco's final episode. You gotta have, like, a farewell episode. I think they did that decently well. So now, if there would have been 6 Godspeed episodes instead of just 4, and if they were to do 6, then I think they definitely could have kept that, Godspeed clone Civil War type thing, and then maybe had, like, 3 entire episodes where August Hart, the real August Hart, is the main villain, but only 4 episodes for a Godspeed storyline. I mean, come on, you gotta have the real Godspeed be the main villain if it's only gonna be for 4 episodes. So that's what I really wasn't a big fan of, is they had too many Godspeed clone stuff going on and not enough real Godspeed. But otherwise, I think the Godspeed, the Godspeed storyline, it was alright, not too bad. So yeah, guys, that was about it for my review. Now, out of 10, what would I rate this season? I would probably give it about a 5 or a 5.5 out of 10. And the reason being it's not like a 3 or a 4 is because the first 2 episodes of this season I thought were very, very good. And, there's some decent moments in the Forces storyline. And besides that, the Godspeed storyline, obviously pretty good. So that's why it's, it's a little bit higher than maybe most people might think. But yeah, besides all that, this season is a very big disappointment. Although I don't know if I still think it's the worst season of The Flash. Honestly, I used to think Season 4 was the worst season of The Flash because here's my reasoning. I know a lot of people like Season 4. I think it was just a little too much humor in Season 4. I mean, it was definitely better than Season 7, the humor. But in Season 4, the Thinker, he was supposed to be a really big comic book villain. He's one of my favorite villains from the comics, and they really screwed him up in Season 4. So I really thought that was the worst season. But now, I don't know. Season 7 could very well be the worst season of The Flash. Comment your guys' thoughts on that down below. I also know a lot of people, they think Season 5 is the worst, and, I guess some think Season 3 is the worst. But yeah, just keep in mind everything I've said in this video. It's my opinion, guys, so make sure you guys comment your own opinion down below. But anyways, I'd say that's about it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Let me know what you guys thought of my review.